The first time the quiet made sense was a rainy evening when the city seemed to forget its own noise. Streetlights blurred into soft halos, and the hum of tires on wet asphalt slipped under the windows like a lullaby. He sat on the floor with a mug wrapped in both hands, steam touching his face before any words did. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Instead, something gentler took over, the feeling that questions could rest. Breathing slowed, shoulders lowered, the room filled with a language older than speech, the kind that lives in glances and the space between them. It didn't feel like withholding. It felt like trust, like setting a fragile glass on a table without the need to explain why it matters. There have been loves that demanded declarations, bright and glittering like fireworks, loud, brief, spectacular. This was a candle, a small flame that refused to go out, one steady inch of light holding open a doorway. He didn't try to dazzle, he noticed, the careful tilt of his head when listening, the way his laughter arrived quietly but stayed in the air like the smell of warm bread, simple and filling. He didn't crowd the moment. He lined up the moments like flat stones across a stream and stepped with me, one quiet footfall at a time. In that hush, a new kind of safety took root, one that didn't need to promise the world because it offered a chair, a blanket, a place to put tired hands. Sometimes love reveals itself by what isn't required. With him, there was no performance, no reaching for the right version of myself to present. I could be the rough draft and the finished page at once. The day it clicked, sunlight lay on the floor like a cat, stretching lazy and golden across the rug. He was fixing a loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet, humming under his breath, surprised and delighted when the door finally settled the way it was supposed to. The tiny victory didn't ask for applause. It was enough that usefulness had returned to a small corner of our life. Love sat beside that satisfaction, unassuming but strong, like a well-built shelf holding the weight of ordinary days. The quiet isn't empty. It has textures, soft and grainy, and moods that turn like weather. There are the silences that sue, after long workdays, after bad news, after the world's edges cut too close. There are the silences that ask when something hurts, when the past taps a shoulder, when an old fear wanders in uninvited. With him, both kinds of silence were welcome. He didn't rush to fill them, didn't panic at the shape they took. He waited, not with indifference, but with a grounded kindness that said, "Stay as long as needed. The chair is warm, the kettle is on." That waiting became a promise more durable than any vow. It said, "You are not too much. You are not a problem to fix. You are a person to be held, even when the holding looks like sitting on opposite ends of a couch, sharing an orange in slow, bright wedges." On a night that felt like a held breath, wind took the power out. The apartment sank into darkness, the digital clock blinking itself to sleep. We found a box of candles and 2 flashlights with batteries that had just enough stubborn life left in them. He set the candles along the windowsill, as if marking a runway for thoughts to land. The world shrank to the circle of light around us, and the tick of cooling metal somewhere in the walls. He passed a blanket across my lap and nudged his shoulder against mine, not asking anything, not even for the story that had been pressing at the back of my throat all week. The story came anyway. It walked out on careful feet because the floor felt safe. He said very little, just enough to keep the air gentle, and I'm here and take your time. The storm moved across the sky like a slow drum, and the room learned our breath. By the time the power returned, the fear inside me had found a quieter room to live in. When people talk about love, they often mean the bright start, the spark that catches everything and makes a spectacle out of ordinary timber. The quiet realization arrives later, when the fire has become a steady hearth. It isn't impressed with itself, it just keeps the chill away. There is grace in the way he reaches for the same mug every morning, trusting it will be there, in the way he leaves the last piece of toast because he knows I like the almost burnt edges, in the way he stands a little to the side when we're in a crowd, shoulder forward, half shield, half anchor. None of it calls attention to itself, and yet the sum is unmistakable. It whispers, home is not a place you find, it's a presence you learn. There were moments when the old scripts tried to take over lessons learned in rooms where love was loud, conditional, a ladder to climb, a test to ace. The quiet asked for unlearning. It asked for softness where hardness had felt like strength. It felt risky to believe that not every tenderness is a trap, that not every pause is an exit, but he kept showing up with a kind of consistency that rewrote the margins. He didn't flinch when tears arrived without a neat explanation. He didn't bargain with comfort, didn't make support a currency to earn. The quiet kept widening, a patient sky. Under it, words became lighter, no longer required to carry everything. Sometimes a hand on the back during a hard conversation meant more than any speech. Sometimes the gift was a nap, the holy permission to rest without apology. Love also lives in how someone loves the world beyond the two of you. Watching him with friends, with strangers, with the stray cat that decided our doorstep, was a good place to audition for permanent residency. Kindness wasn't an act, it was habitat. He fixed a neighbor's leaky sink, even though the day had already been long. He learned the names of the baristas and remembered the favorite playlist of the one who always wore a denim jacket in any weather. He held boundaries with gentleness, never mistaking softness for surrender. That steadiness rounded the edges of my own impatience, teaching a slower rhythm, one that kept time with care rather than urgency. One afternoon, we took a walk through a narrow park where the trees meet overhead in a green, stained, glass cathedral. Children's laughter scattered like birds. We didn't talk much. There was the swish of leaves, the staccato bounce of a basketball on cracked pavement, the metallic hiss of a sprinkler. He pointed out a robin's nest tucked in the crook of a branch, the small, miraculous architecture of twigs and trust. In that fragile basket lived an entire thesis on tenderness, how life builds itself out of almost nothings, how strength and gentleness make a reliable weave. The idea that love must be proven by spectacle fell away like old bark. Presence proved itself, hour by hour. At the edge of the park, he held the gate for a family with a stroller and smiled the kind of smile that starts in the eyes. The moment passed without fanfare. The heart filed it under evidence. There is a special courage in shared quiet. It asks to be known without the protective performance of cleverness or charm. It asks to be seen when the world's stage, lights dim and the makeup is washed off and the truth of a tired face remains. It is not the absence of passion. It is the frame that holds it safely. Within it, laughter rings truer. Within it, the brief press of his forehead to mine can carry a day's worth of tenderness. Within it, even the hard conversations become navigable because the goal is not victory but understanding. The quiet is the boat, love is the river. Both are needed to cross. On a different evening, no storm this time, just a slow blue dusk. Music played softly from a speaker, some old vinyl digitized with all its warm imperfections. He swayed a little, not quite dancing, more like reminding his body of softness. He reached out a hand, fingers fit naturally, not locking, just resting together, as if touch could be breathable. We moved barely at all, then not at all, the way a compass needle settles when it finds north. That was it. The realization did not bang on the door. It exhaled. If language had tried to name it, the moment might have scattered. But it stayed, and in staying, it told the truth. Grand gestures can be beautiful, wild passion can be a gift, but love, real and durable, often lives in the stillness between two heartbeats, where silence feels safer than words. The morning began with fog clinging to the windows, a thin silver veil softening everything. The city sounded different through it, muted, slower, almost tender. The warmth from his breath left small clouds against the glass as he leaned close, tracing shapes only half formed before fading again. There was no need to speak. The silence already understood. Somewhere between his gentle hum and the rhythm of the clock, calm settled like a hand smoothing a restless heartbeat. It felt like standing in the center of still water, nothing to chase, nothing to escape. Just the quiet truth of being safe where it mattered. Days unfolded like that sometimes, wordless but full. A glance across a crowded street, the way fingers brushed while passing a cup, the soft laugh shared over something unimportant, yet suddenly everything. No grand promises, no polished lines, just a presence that wrapped itself around ordinary moments until they glowed. He had the kind of steadiness that didn't announce itself. It simply existed, reliable as breath. Even the air between two people can learn a language, and theirs spoke of belonging. When he looked over, there was recognition without question. When he turned away, the space he left behind didn't feel like absence. It felt like trust. Later, when the world demanded more noise, meetings, errands, the buzz of everyone else's stories, the memory of that peace stayed tucked just under the ribs. Love like this doesn't need to be performed. It lingers in the way coats hang side by side, in the echo of laughter that still drifts through an empty kitchen, in the smell of coffee that outlasts conversation. Sometimes comfort hides in the simplest things, the sound of him turning pages of a book, the half-murmured tune that trails after him down the hall. No spotlight, no script, only the deep relief of knowing someone sees the quiet parts and doesn't ask them to change. There were evenings when the sky bruised purple and blue, when exhaustion turned voices thin. Those were the nights when patience became the purest kind of affection. He didn't try to fix the tiredness or fill the silence with explanations. He just sat close enough for warmth to pass between. The couch sagged under shared weight, the kind that feels earned. A single touch on the shoulder said, "It's all right not to be strong tonight," and that was enough. Some loves teach through conversation. This one taught through stillness. Every pause was an invitation, not a void. Even conflict took on a different tone here. Anger never stayed sharp for long. Words might rise, but they softened before they could wound, as though the heart itself refused to betray the sanctuary they'd built. Apologies came without ceremony, offered in small gestures, an extra blanket, a cup of water left on the table, a quiet presence lingering until forgiveness found its way back. The world beyond those walls could remain loud, demanding, and restless. Inside there was breathing space, an invisible circle where both could simply exist without performance. One Sunday, rain tapped against the roof in a lazy rhythm. The air smelled of wet soil and cinnamon. Music drifted from an old speaker, the kind of tune that doesn't fill a room but hums gently through it. He stood by the window, shoulders relaxed, eyes tracing raindrops as they raced each other down the pane. That's when it became clear love didn't always arrive with fire. Sometimes it arrived with quiet endurance, like a heartbeat that never rushed even when the world did. The peace between them wasn't emptiness, it was a shared language written in silence. Over time, that unspoken comfort became the anchor. Through illness, through long nights of uncertainty, through the heavy stillness after bad news, it held. Words helped, yes, but touch spoke louder, a palm resting on the back of a hand, a forehead leaned against another's shoulder. Breath synchronizing until it was impossible to tell whose began first. The comfort wasn't about fixing the pain. It was about making sure neither faced it alone. Even grief learned to soften under such steady kindness. When light returned after hardship, laughter followed naturally, not forced. Small joys became sacred. Cooking together without hurry, watching the same movie for the 10th time just to quote lines, walking home without needing to fill the air with talk. The quiet carried its own warmth, a shelter built from ordinary hours. That's how love, real love, shows its depth, not through constant excitement, but through constancy itself. The years that followed only deepened that truth. Every wrinkle in time, every shared mistake, every moment of doubt layered the bond thicker, like varnish protecting wood. The unspoken comfort never dulled, it matured. It became the soft hum that lived underneath everything else, the reminder that home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a person, and sometimes it's the quiet between two steady breaths. Even now, when distance or circumstance pulls life into different shapes, that same air remains between them. It carries the familiar pulse of peace, the echo of shared silence, the feeling of belonging that outlasts presence. Nothing grand, nothing loud, just the rare golden stillness that says, even without words, even without touch, this love knows the way home. Trust did not arrive dressed in certainty. It came slowly with the soft footfall of patience, asking nothing but honesty. First, there was the small confession, the kind that catches in the throat because it feels unremarkable and yet carries the weight of years. Hands trembled just enough to betray the nerves. The room held its breath. Across from that trembling, there was no lecture, no heroism, only a gentle, steady gaze that said, "Keep going." Words spilled out clumsy at first, like pebbles loosened from a riverbank. The current didn't pull them under. They landed on open palms and were kept safe. Something loosened in the chest. The body recognized what the mind had not dared to claim. Being fully seen without retreat on the other side is a kind of electricity, quiet, clean, undeniable. The shadows were not dramatic. They were ordinary bruises gathered over time, the failure that still stung, the ways of withdrawing learned early and perfected into habit, the reflex to laugh off pain to keep from burdening anyone. Naming them felt like standing under a harsh light. But the light here was different. Warm, diffused, more candle than interrogation lamp. Each admission received a simple nod, a presence that did not flinch or turn away. In that kindness, a surprising courage surfaced. When the face revealed its least flattering angles, when the voice cracked, when silence interrupted because there was no tidy ending to the story, nothing broke. The connection did not shrink back to safety. It leaned closer, quietly, respectfully, an approach that asked for permission at every step. Trust learned to walk on those evenings, not sprint, not leap, walk. A familiar hand offered tea. A familiar voice asked nothing more than, "Is there anything that would help right now?" Sometimes help meant words. Sometimes it meant none. A shoulder became a harbor. Knees touched beneath a thin blanket. Breath warmed the distance between. Not every touch intends possession. Some touches translate devotion, a vow phrased through skin, present, present, present. The heart, suspicious from old disappointments, listened for a misstep, and instead found a rhythm consistent as tide. Fear began to tire. Hope found a chair and sat down. There were tests not by design, but because life has its weather. News that knocked the wind out arrived on a Tuesday. A door closed somewhere far away, and the sound traveled through the bones. Panic fluttered at the edges of vision. The familiar urge to disappear rose like a tide. Smile, deflect, pretend. Then came a decision as small as it was radical. Stay in the room, in the feeling, in the mess. The result was not judgment, not advice delivered like a verdict. It was a pair of arms that understood grief's grammar. It was the quiet that followed a whispered, "Take your time." It was a mouth that pressed to a temple as if to seal the truth. Nothing about this hurt will make love retreat. After that, the body began to trust before the mind could articulate why. Shoulders, once braced as default posture, forgot to hold tension so fiercely. Sleep came easier, even on difficult nights, because the space between two people worked like a guardian, catching bad dreams in its net. Memories that had been locked away for years came out not as confessions to a judge, but as offerings to a partner. Each time, the same response: thank you for telling me. Gratitude where guilt had been expected. Reverence where fear had expected recoil. That reversal changed the furniture of the heart, moving the heavy pieces to make room for living. Trust also means allowing delight to be uncomplicated. Joy had often been rationed in the past, measured carefully so it wouldn't go missing all at once. Now joy splashed without an accountant. A look across a table became laughter that tumbled, helpless and bright. A mundane errand turned into a miniature adventure. The way a hand guided lightly at the small of the back in a crowded aisle. The relief of knowing that if the world jostled too hard, balance would be gently steadied. Even small celebrations, burnt pancakes salvaged with citrus and sugar, a fix-it project that finally worked on the third try became proof that happiness did not require perfection, only honest presence. The shadows didn't vanish in joy. They simply found that joy did not exile them. The past, of course, tried to reclaim its authority. A familiar ache returned one night with the old script. This is too much. No one stays for long. Best to pull away first. The instinct to run appeared like an open door in a burning room. Fingers reached for the doorknob and paused, because another instinct, newer but growing stronger, suggested a different escape, turn around. There he was, not blocking the door, not insisting on closure, simply holding out a steady hand. No pressure, only invitation. The choice to take that hand felt like stepping onto a bridge built plank by plank, with every previous moment of honesty. Halfway across, the urge to flee stopped arguing. On the other side, a body landed in a familiar embrace and understood that there is a speed at which trust can travel that fear cannot match. Intimacy deepened in the way language sharpened. Not the dramatic declarations, though those had their place, but the precision of small truths. That joke hurts more than it seems. Could we try a different way of teasing? Today carries a sadness with no name. Could we sit closer than usual? I don't need solutions, I need warmth. Requests once felt like risks, now they sounded like music sheet notes guiding two instruments toward harmony. The response was rarely perfect, sometimes clumsy, but it was sincere, quick to adjust, quicker to apologize. A wrong step did not ruin the dance, it enriched it, because learning the other's rhythms became part of the choreography. There is an electricity to being known that cannot be faked. It isn't the spark that flashes and burns out. It is the current that hums beneath everything, lighting corners once thought unusable. It flickers on during hard days when patience runs thin and turns impatience back into tenderness with a reminder. This is the person who stayed when the shadows stepped forward. Stay now. It hums during ordinary afternoons, when eyes meet over a sink full of dishes and smile at the same unspoken thought. It surges when a fear is named aloud and does not fracture the room, when a fault is owned without theatrics and met with, "Thank you, let's do better together." That current changes even the taste of solitude, because being alone no longer means being abandoned. It means resting inside a bond that stretches across distance. What began as survival learned to become surrender, not the kind that erases self, but the kind that allows two separate sovereignties to trust the borderlands between them. Boundaries, once defensive walls, turned into clear paths and gates. The word no lost its panic and gained dignity. The word yes lost its desperation and gained joy. Choices were made not to avoid conflict, but to nurture connection. The future stopped being a cliff, faced mystery, and became a landscape still wild in places, still requiring courage, but navigable with two sets of eyes, two steady hands, one enduring map made of everything already overcome. And so the shadows remained, because life is honest that way, but their power changed. They no longer stood at the front of the room demanding attention. They took their seats in the audience while love took the stage. When they rose to heckle, they were answered not with bravado but with presence. A palm against a cheek, a whispered truth repeated until it soaked in seen, still wanted, flawed, still cherished, afraid, still safe. The electricity of that knowing didn't shout, it shone, it warmed, it guided. This is how trust turns closeness into home. Time doesn't always begin with introductions. Sometimes it begins with recognition, a quiet pull that doesn't ask for explanation. The first moment felt like that, an echo, not a discovery. Eyes met, and something older than both of them stirred awake, a memory too deep for words. Conversation started easily, as if continuing an old thread rather than weaving something new. Hours disappeared. When the clock insisted it was late, disbelief followed. The air between them carried an ease too familiar for strangers. There was laughter, then quiet, then the kind of silence that doesn't demand to be broken because it already says enough. Days unfolded without much choreography. Messages found their way through long hours, voices through late night calls that blurred into dawn. Everything about it had the texture of déjà vu, each detail new, yet known. It wasn't about pace or milestones. It was about rhythm, about how breaths aligned without trying, how thoughts arrived in tandem. Once, standing together under streetlights, they both turned to speak at the same time, said the same words, then stopped to laugh, realizing that even their timing had begun to match. It felt less like falling in love and more like remembering where love had been waiting. The connection defied the logic of calendars. There were stretches apart, entire seasons filled with other obligations, yet distance never hardened into absence. A message sent after months still felt like the next line in the same conversation. Time might have moved on, but something beneath it remained constant, untouched. In other lives, other stories, months apart would have meant fading. Here it meant deepening. The longer the separation, the clearer the recognition when it ended. Their souls seemed to carry a map no clock could rewrite. Once, an unexpected storm trapped them indoors for 2 days. The world outside turned gray and relentless. Inside, hours stretched soft and unhurried. They cooked with what little was left in the kitchen, read fragments of books aloud, made up stories for the endings they didn't know. When the lights flickered out, candles painted their faces gold. The shadows swayed like slow dancers, and time itself seemed to lean in to listen. They didn't talk about the future or the past. They existed entirely in the present, and for once, the present was enough. The storm passed eventually, but its stillness stayed inside them. Even when the world resumed its pace, they carried that quiet tempo, unbothered by urgency. There were hard moments, too. Life asked them to grow in separate directions. Careers, family, geography, all those things that divide people who were once inseparable. But what surprised them wasn't the distance, it was the way the bond endured it. A song heard on a random morning could pull the heart back across miles. A familiar phrase from someone else's mouth would spark a memory so vivid, it was as if the person stood right there. It became clear that connection, this deep, doesn't need constant tending. It breathes on its own. Once, after years apart, they met again by accident in a train station. Crowds moved like rivers, announcements echoed through speakers, and yet everything else seemed to pause when their eyes found each other. Time folded neatly on itself. The years fell away. The old rhythm stepped forward like it had been waiting for a cue. Words came easily, but even without them, understanding flowed. There were differences, of course, lines around the eyes, stories written into posture, but beneath the surface, the same pulse beat steady. The reunion wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, grounded, inevitable. Evenings followed where they talked about everything that had happened, all they had become. They shared what had been gained and what had been lost, speaking not from nostalgia, but from gratitude. The connection didn't need to reclaim the past. It had already transcended it. The realization came slowly. that love like this isn't bound by the ticking of time or the labels people try to give it. It's the thread that runs through every version of a person, connecting who they were, who they are, and who they will become. There was a night when conversation stopped mid-sentence. Music played softly, and the air between them was alive with the hum of unspoken truth. Fingers brushed lightly at first, then stayed, the contact more grounding than any vow. The years behind them no longer mattered, neither did the years ahead. What existed was this, a recognition older than both, steady as the stars that outlast every fleeting season. In that moment it was clear, time can stretch, twist, and pull, but it cannot rewrite the way two souls fit when they find each other again. That is the gift and the ache of a timeless connection. It doesn't fade with distance or age. It simply waits, patient as the tide, sure as the return. There was a time when love meant running, chasing, proving, reaching for something that always seemed to move one step further away. The noise of it all filled every corner of life, the fear of not being enough, the ache of being too much, the exhaustion of trying to earn what should have been freely given. Then came a different kind of presence. It didn't announce itself with fireworks or promises. It simply arrived, quiet but certain, like dawn slipping into a room before the world wakes. From the first shared silence, there was peace, a stillness that didn't feel empty but full, as if the heart had finally stopped pacing and found a rhythm it could trust. Days began to take on a softness that hadn't existed before. Mornings no longer started with the anxious need to impress or the dread of being unseen. Instead, they started with the warmth of steady breath beside another, the gentle familiarity of two lives intertwining without demand. Breakfasts became rituals of calm, toast slightly burned, coffee poured imperfectly, laughter over mismatched mugs. The simplest acts carried weight because they were done together, and together meant safety. In the quiet hum of ordinary life, love took root. It wasn't performance, it was presence. The home they built wasn't about walls or a dress. It was built of gestures, of small and consistent tenderness. A coat left by the door for late returns, a note tucked between pages of a book, a blanket draped across legs without a word. Each action whispered, "Stay, you're safe here." Even arguments carried softness. Anger never turned cruel. Disagreements happened in tones that still carried care. When silence came, it wasn't punishment. It was breathing space, and every return from it was gentle, a mutual promise renewed in the way hands found each other again. There was a day when everything outside seemed to unravel, news that cut too deep, the world spinning too fast. In that chaos, there was one place where time slowed, in arms that held without question. No speeches, no solutions, just the grounding weight of another heartbeat saying, "You're not alone in this." The body learned to relax there, not because the world was suddenly kind, but because love had built a shelter inside it. The storms could rage beyond the windows, the air between them stayed still, even solitude changed meaning. Before, it had been loneliness, an echo that hurt. Now it was rest. The hours spent apart no longer hollowed, they filled. The thought of return carried no fear, only anticipation of a familiar peace. Love didn't demand constant presence to prove itself. It trusted. It breathed. It knew that home wasn't lost just because two people were in different rooms. There were evenings that defined everything, quiet, unremarkable evenings that would mean nothing to anyone else. One in particular stayed etched in memory. Rain on the roof, music soft and low, the scent of something cooking in the background. He stood by the stove, humming, unaware of being watched. The light touched his face in a way that made the moment expand, as if the entire world had paused to listen. That was when it became clear that love, at its purest, doesn't always arrive with grand confessions. Sometimes it simply exists in the way someone hums to themselves while stirring a pot, unaware they're being loved for their simplest self. Love, real love, doesn't erase the world's noise. It teaches how to live quietly within it. It's found in shared exhaustion after long days, in the patience to listen when words stumble, in the forgiveness that doesn't need to be requested aloud. It's in the way laughter returns after sadness, not forced, but natural, like sunlight finding its way back through curtains. Each season adds a new layer of belonging, spring with its soft beginnings, summer with its warmth, autumn with its quiet gratitude, winter with its closeness. Together, they weave a rhythm that feels eternal even within the passing of time. Sometimes love shows its strength in stillness, the nights when nothing extraordinary happens, when they sit across from each other reading, the only sound the turning of pages, are the ones that remind what real peace feels like. There is no performing, no needing to fill the space with noise, just the comfort of existing side by side, knowing that silence here isn't distance, it's harmony. There are moments when the mind wanders to what came before, to loves that demanded exhaustion, to places where affection was conditional. The contrast makes this tenderness even more profound. Here, love doesn't require shrinking or stretching to fit someone else's version of worth. It allows growth, welcomes imperfection, holds space for flaws. When mistakes happen, and they do, they're met not with coldness but with patience. The apology becomes less about guilt and more about healing together. Years pass quietly, wrinkles appear, hair grays, life shifts, but the essence remains untouched. Love ages the way fine wood does, deeper, warmer, more solid with time. The same hands that once trembled in the thrill of beginning now hold with the wisdom of endurance. And even when words grow few, when memory falters or time begins to blur the edges, the feeling remains. The heart still knows the sound of safety, the texture of belonging. It knows where home is, because home isn't built, it's found. It's not a place you enter, it's a person, a feeling, a peace that sits quietly in the chest even when the world outside demands noise. It's the slow exhale after years of holding breath. It's the knowing that no matter what happens, some part of life will always be kind because it was shared. Love becomes the soft hum beneath everything, the heartbeat that steadies all else. That is the truth of it. Real love is where the world finally quiets down, where arms become shelter, and hearts stop searching because they've already arrived. If this story touched something quiet inside you, don't let it fade when the screen goes dark. Hit like, share it with someone who believes in gentle forever, and subscribe for more stories where love is raw, real, and timeless. Every week, we bring you another heartbeat, a whisper of truth, a reminder that love still lives in the soft places. Turn on the bell icon and stay with us in this space where words meet emotion and souls remember what home feels like. Because here, love doesn't end when the story does, it begins again in you.